The entire world once viewed Tony Curtis as the most attractive leading man in Hollywood, thanks to his ability to lure a series of female stars into his web of romance. But few know that the greatest humiliations of his life did not lie in rejection. They lay in 6 women who directly used his body and his reputation to serve their own ruthless calculations. Did you think Marilyn Monroe submissively fell for him? Think again. Behind the on-screen kiss was a woman who repeatedly locked her bedroom door, forcing Tony to stand rooted for hours to absorb the full brunt of her panic attacks. Do you believe Yvonne De Carlo or Natalie Wood were infatuated with his looks? The truth is the exact opposite. One threw him her keys and forced him to haul luggage in the middle of the night, while the other publicly held his hand just to spite her own mother before abandoning him in a parking lot. And the most pragmatic was Gloria De Haven, who proactively pulled him into the bedroom only in exchange for him emptying his wallet to pay for a luxury dinner immediately afterward. In 2009, while confined to a wheelchair at age 84, Tony Curtis decided to look back at old photographs to name the 6 women he regretted most. This file will expose the full range of physical manipulation behind bedroom doors, completely shattering the image of the arrogant man the public once assumed he was. Marilyn Monroe, the locked door to unload panic. In 2009, Tony Curtis turned 84 and spent most of his time in a wheelchair placed in his quiet living room. The process of aging and illness had severely restricted his physical movements. Tony slowly reached out to pull a cardboard box full of old photos onto his lap, then picked out a black and white photo of Marilyn Monroe's smile. The public and the press always hailed their kiss on the set of Some Like It Hot as a legendary romantic feat. However, Tony completely denied it. He immediately crumpled the photo and threw it straight into the trash with a decisive motion. Sinking into a secret relationship with Marilyn brought him no glory. It only caused severe physical exhaustion and directly threatened his acting career. Tony closed his eyes to recall the incredibly harsh work schedule on the set that year. Director Billy Wilder always demanded absolute precision in every frame, forcing Tony to wear cumbersome, multi-layered drag costumes. He had to pat a bra, wear pointed high heels, and apply a thick layer of makeup on his face when he stepped onto the set. He stood exactly on the marked spot on the wooden floor and waited under the scorching heat of the high-intensity lighting rigs. Dozens of technical staff were on standby, but an hour would pass and Marilyn still wouldn't appear. She flatly refused to come out of her dressing room and tightly twisted the door lock from the inside. Assistant directors pounded on the door repeatedly and called her name many times, but she remained completely silent. Tony was forced to drag his aching feet in high heels toward Marilyn's private area to solve the problem himself. He knocked, identified himself, and asked her to unlock the door. The wooden door slowly creaked open. Marilyn reached out, grabbed Tony's wrist tightly, and used force to pull him inside before slamming the door shut. The air in the room was stifling. Marilyn hadn't prepared her costume for the next scene. Her hair was a mess, and her lipstick was smeared. She sat slumped in a leather chair before her vanity, crying loudly, and reached out to cling tightly to Tony's arms. She wasn't looking for a lover for intimacy, but used his body as a support to unload her nervous panic. She forced him to stand still and listen to repeated complaints about the pressures of work. Tony had to remain standing in that cramped room, using all the strength in his arms to hold her shoulders and force her to sit still in the chair. He personally poured water, brought the glass to her mouth, and forced her to take sips to regain her composure. This struggle drained a vast amount of his energy, leaving his body completely worn out by the time Marilyn agreed to stop crying and reapply her makeup. His dress and layers were wrinkled, while sweat poured out, washing away his own makeup. He turned the deadbolt and stepped out to the camera area in a state of exhaustion. The bad situation didn't end there. Director Billy Wilder, witnessing the broken filming schedule and the depleted budget, was furious. He slammed the script onto his desk, strode directly in front of Tony, pointed his finger straight at the actor's face, and shouted loudly. The director vented the entire crew's frustration onto Tony, forcing him to stand still and bow his head to take the brunt of it without being able to explain anything. Spending the night with an American beauty icon was not a proud trophy for the playboy, but a physical punishment repeated every day. Tony Curtis pushed his wheelchair back a notch and stared at the trash can next to the table. The decision to step into Marilyn's dressing room caused him deep regret because he was merely an involuntary servant forced to attend to her every time she broke down. Yet, the fatigue caused by Marilyn did not strike at his self-esteem as hard as the next star, who directly turned him into an unpaid luggage carrier and decisively kicked him out of her house in the middle of the night. Yvonne De Carlo, a ring of keys and the order to haul luggage. Tony Curtis shifted his gaze from the trash can containing Marilyn Monroe's photo. He immediately reached into the cardboard box on his lap, using his rough fingers to pull out an old photo with yellowed edges. Yvonne De Carlo's face was clear on the paper. In the early 1950s, Yvonne held the status of an extremely powerful movie star. At that time, Tony was just a young actor struggling to find opportunities to appear on screen. For years, Tony always stood before crowds and boldly claimed he had conquered this powerful woman with his masculine looks. But now, he slammed the photo onto the glass tabletop and admitted the truth. Yvonne De Carlo never considered him a lover. She directly assigned him the role of an unpaid servant. The incident began at a wrap party held in the Beverly Hills area. Tony proactively took a glass of wine and approached Yvonne. He stood close to her, dropped his familiar flirtatious lines, and suggested taking her home. Yvonne didn't act shy or offer any reply. She opened her expensive handbag, reached inside, and directly pulled out a ring of metal car keys. She threw the keys straight at Tony's chest. As he reached out to catch them, she immediately turned her back, strode toward the main door, and raised her hand, signaling him to follow. Tony gripped the keys in his palm. He smiled smugly, certain he was completely in control of the situation. However, when they stepped out to the parking lot, Tony's self-satisfaction quickly vanished. Yvonne didn't head for the seats. She stopped, reached out, and pointed directly at 3 large leather suitcases sitting on the ground near the rear of the car. She directly ordered him to manually carry the entire heavy load of luggage and arrange it neatly in the trunk. Tony was forced to set his wine glass on the hood. He took off his overcoat, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and braced himself to lift each suitcase. The weight of the leather suitcases filled with belongings pressed hard against his muscles. Sweat poured out, soaking the back of his shirt. The process of hauling drained much of his strength. When he reached out to slam the trunk lid shut, Yvonne was already settled in the back seat. She decisively did not invite him to sit next to her. She required him to sit in the driver's seat, start the engine, and operate the car according to the route she designated. Tony had to fulfill the job of a private chauffeur. He carefully steered through the dark curves of the hills in Yvonne's absolute silence. When the car stopped before the gate of Yvonne's private mansion, Tony turned off the engine and stepped out. He then had to open the trunk and carry all that heavy luggage from the parking area into the center of the living room. Immediately after the last suitcase was placed on the wooden floor, Yvonne beckoned him into the bedroom. There, she proactively performed everything very quickly to settle her own needs. The room was completely devoid of whispers or affectionate gestures. As soon as she achieved her goal, Yvonne immediately sprang out of bed. She manually put her evening gown back on quickly. She picked up Tony's shirt and trousers thrown on the floor, balled them up, and threw them straight at him. She walked quickly to the hallway and manually twisted the deadbolt to throw the main door wide open. She stood holding the edge of the door, pointed her finger straight out toward the deserted asphalt road. and loudly ordered Tony to leave her house immediately. Tony was forced to put on his disheveled clothes and carry his shoes across the threshold. The wooden door immediately slammed shut right behind him. The sound of the metal lock echoed dryly in the night. He stood abandoned in the middle of the cold night. The only car parked in the yard belonged to Yvonne, and she had put the keys back into her handbag. Tony slipped his shoes onto his feet. He had to walk alone along the steep hill road for hours to find a public phone booth to call a taxi. His body was exhausted from hauling luggage and continuous physical activity. He bowed his head and walked in the darkness with aching feet. Tony Curtis reached out and took the photo of Yvonne De Carlo. He used both hands to tear the photo into small pieces and brushed them all onto the floor. The decision to approach her was a mistake he deeply regretted. He had been ruthlessly drained of strength by a pragmatic woman. Yet, this physical humiliation was not as dangerous as being used as a physical obstacle in power struggles. In the next story, the young star Natalie Wood directly held his hand for a stroll just to spite her own mother, then abandoned him in a parking lot to bear the full brunt of that powerful woman's rage. Natalie Wood, public hand-holding to spite her mother. Tony Curtis shifted his body slightly in the wheelchair to find a more comfortable position. The atmosphere in the living room maintained absolute silence. He reached into the cardboard box on his lap, flipped through a few old photos, and picked out a color picture of Natalie Wood's radiant face. At that time, the media constantly reported on the romance between the handsome leading man and the rising young Hollywood starlet. Tony had smugly assumed he had used his masculine charm to conquer Natalie. But now, he placed the photo on his lap, pressed his finger hard against the paper, and admitted a completely different truth. Natalie Wood was never lovesick or infatuated with him. She directly turned him into a physical obstacle to provoke and defy her mother. In the mid-50s, Natalie Wood was under the strict control of her mother, Maria Gurdon. Maria managed every work schedule, seized all acting fees, and directly interfered in all of her daughter's personal relationships. Natalie was incredibly frustrated and wanted to resist. Instead of arguing directly with words, she decided to use Tony as a tool. One afternoon, Natalie proactively called Tony. She required him to drive to pick her up at the main gate of the film studio, where Maria frequently stood on guard to monitor her daughter's activities. When Tony drove to the location and had just stepped onto the asphalt, Natalie immediately strode toward him. She didn't maintain a normal social distance. She directly slipped her arm through Tony's and tightly intertwined her fingers with his. She used force to pull him along as they walked across the area where Maria was standing and talking to a group of producers. Natalie rested her head on Tony's shoulder, smiled publicly, and intentionally walked very slowly so her mother would clearly witness the entirety of those intimate actions. That night, Natalie followed Tony back to his private apartment. She proactively closed the room door, removed her clothes, and performed the interactions with great haste. She absolutely did not chat, did not demand affectionate gestures, or offer promises for the future. Her greatest need was not sex, but completing the act of breaking the prohibitive rules set by her mother as soon as she achieved her goal. She quickly put her clothes back on and required Tony to take her back to the studio the following afternoon, according to the schedule. Tony drove Natalie back to the studio's vast parking lot as the two pushed the car doors open and stepped out. Maria immediately appeared from afar. She took long strides, her face red with anger. She raised her arms straight out, pointing her index finger toward Tony's face. At the exact moment tension escalated, Natalie immediately acted, instead of staying to explain or protect the man accompanying her. She decisively withdrew her hand from Tony's. She stepped back quickly, strode to her own private car parked a few meters away. She opened the door, sat in the driver's seat, and slammed the door hard. She turned the key to start the engine, stepped on the gas, and drove out of the parking lot rapidly. She looked absolutely straight ahead and did not look back. Tony was left alone in the middle of the empty lot, strewn with gravel under the harsh sun. He had to stand rooted to the spot to directly bear the full wrath of Maria. She moved close to him, shouting loudly and using the harshest words. She swung her arms in the air, threatening to use her intimate relationships with studio directors to strip away his roles and completely freeze his film career. Tony broke into a cold sweat that soaked the back of his shirt. He couldn't resist, couldn't walk away. He could only stand still with his head bowed to take the punishment. The decision to enter this relationship caused him deep regret. He was not a lover, but merely a physical shield brought out to take punishment intended for someone else. Mamie Van Doren, the drag to appear on the front page. In the 50s, Tony was maintaining a legal marriage. He lived with his official wife in a sprawling Hollywood mansion. Despite this, he frequently took his car and left the house at night to seek out fleeting physical relationships. Tony had assumed he could hide every act of infidelity perfectly. However, when he placed Mamie Van Doren's photo on his lap, he was forced to admit his dismal failure. Mamie had zero interest in becoming a secret lover. She directly used his body and his reputation to carry out a public media campaign. The incident took place on a weekend evening. Mamie proactively called Tony and arranged to meet him at a restaurant located right on the busiest street in Los Angeles. Tony agreed immediately. He put on his coat, took his keys, and started the engine to drive to the meeting point. He assumed this was just a quick meeting, after which the two would find a discreet hotel to settle their physical needs. He was completely wrong. Before Tony appeared, Mamie had secretly called dozens of paparazzi. She provided the exact location, the car license plate, as well as the time of the meeting. She needed images of the two together to appear on the front pages of the entertainment papers the next morning. The moment Tony's car stopped at the curb in front of the restaurant, he reached out to push the door open and stepped 1 foot onto the asphalt. Immediately, more than 20 paparazzi rushed out from hidden corners around the area. They held cameras in their hands, swarmed the walkway, and fired their shutters continuously. Dozens of camera flashes blinked, blinding the entire surrounding space. Tony was startled and panicked. He pulled his leg back, put both hands up to cover his face, and intended to lock the door and crawl back into the car to escape. But Mamie acted much faster. She pushed the restaurant door open and lunged onto the sidewalk. She reached out with both hands, locked onto Tony's right arm, and used force to pull him hard away from the car door. Tony tried to yank his arm back, but Mamie tightened her fingers. She pressed her nails hard into his suit jacket, directly dragging him along the sidewalk filled with passers-by. She absolutely gave him no chance to turn his face away. She used her body weight to press close against him, rested her head on his chest, and smiled radiantly, looking directly into the camera lenses. She forced him to stand still in the frame. Tony grimaced, looked down at the ground, and tried to walk faster. But Mamie continuously clung tight to his arm and held his body back. She directly turned him into a performance prop for the cameras. The very next morning, a series of major newspapers were published simultaneously. The photo of Tony and Mamie embracing on the street covered the front pages. Tony held the paper in his hand, broke into a cold sweat that soaked the back of his shirt, and hurriedly drove home. When he pushed the door into the living room, his wife was already waiting there. The newspaper was tossed carelessly on the table. His wife was furious. She reached out, grabbed a ceramic vase, and threw it straight down onto the wooden floor. The vase shattered into many pieces. She stepped forward, pointed her finger straight at Tony's face, and shouted loudly. She decisively demanded a divorce. She walked straight into the bedroom, pulled out a large suitcase, and stuffed all her clothes inside. Tony ran after her in terror. He had to directly drop both knees onto the floorboards. He gripped her wrists and begged her to change her mind. He had to perform a series of submissive acts, make oaths, and endure verbal humiliation for hours to prevent her from carrying that suitcase out the door. Tony Curtis crumpled the photo of Mamie Van Doren and threw it hard onto the floor. Going to the meeting with Mamie was a stupid decision he deeply regretted. She had exploited his body, pushed his family life to the brink of collapse, and stripped away all of his self-respect at home. Terry Moore, the window jump to escape bodyguards. Tony Curtis placed both hands on the glass tabletop. He pushed the cardboard box hard to the edge of the table. A few old photos slid out. He reached out to pick up a photo lying face down on the wood. He flipped it over. The surface of the photo bore the image of actress Terry Moore, in the 50s. Terry was a beautiful starlet who always attracted media attention. Tony had smugly thought himself capable of competing for the most attractive women in Hollywood. He placed the photo on his knee, slapped his palm hard against the paper, and shook his head. Stepping into a hotel room with Terry was not a victory. It was a physical trap that pushed him into a life-threatening situation. The incident began at a quiet nightclub with few guests. Tony sat alone at the bar. Terry strode over, pulled up a stool, and sat close to him. She proactively ordered 2 glasses of hard liquor. She didn't bother with flirtatious small talk or wait for Tony to speak. She directly reached out, grabbed his wrist, pulled him up, and headed straight for the door. She waved down a taxi. She read out the address of a small hotel tucked away in a dark alley. Tony hurried into the car, smiling smugly and assuming his charm had made it so she couldn't wait any longer. He was completely unaware of the truth behind it. Terry was involved in an extremely complex connection with Howard Hughes at the time. The powerful billionaire possessed a massive fortune and controlled a vast array of personal surveillance systems. He hired a 24/7 bodyguard detail to monitor Terry's every move. Terry dragging Tony into the hotel did not stem from physical need. She proactively used the presence of a famous actor to provoke and challenge the billionaire's ruthless control. The two entered the hotel room. Terry immediately twisted the door lock. She removed her coat and performed physical interactions quickly. She didn't care about Tony's reaction. Her eyes constantly looked toward the window. Only a few hours later, chaotic sounds rang out. The thumping of heavy footsteps pounded against the wooden floor out in the hallway. Immediately following were deafening bangs on the door. 3 of Howard Hughes's large bodyguards stood outside. They used their fists to hammer repeatedly against the wood. They shouted Terry's name and threatened to break the lock and storm inside. Tony was startled awake. He sprang out of bed. Panic set in, making his body tremble. He understood all too well the actual power of Howard Hughes. If caught red-handed in this room, he would suffer brutal physical beatings, and his acting career would be completely erased. Tony scrambled to jump to the floor. He hurriedly grabbed his trousers, shirt, and shoes scattered on the ground. He didn't have time to get dressed. He clutched the entire pile of clothes to his chest. Terry showed no sign of panic. She stood with her arms crossed, watching Tony struggle to find a way out. She stood still and refused to go open the door. Tony rushed toward the window. He used both hands to shove the glass frame up. The room was on the 2nd floor. He poked his head out, looking down at the pitch-black street. He hooked one leg over the sill. The pounding on the door behind him grew stronger. The wooden hinges began to vibrate violently. Tony held his breath. He swung himself over the window ledge, let go of his hands, slid down onto the lower floor awning, and jumped straight onto the asphalt. Both of his feet hit the ground hard, causing stinging pain. He didn't dare stop to check the injury. He went barefoot, clutching his pile of clothes, and ran for his life in the darkness. He ran headlong through many deserted streets until he found his private car. He opened the door, dove inside, turned the key to start the engine, and flopped the gas pedal to speed straight home. He sat behind the steering wheel, gasping for breath, sweat pouring down his forehead. Tony Curtis reached out with both hands and tore the photo of Terry Moore in half. The decision to get into that taxi with her was a mistake he deeply regretted. He was merely a puppet she used as a tool to provoke the brutal billionaire. The flight in the middle of the night dealt a heavy blow to his pride. Yet, the final woman on the list attacked him with a tactic no less pragmatic. The star, Gloria De Haven, proactively invited him to a luxury restaurant, drained his money, then stood up, took her bag, and walked away the moment the bill was placed on the table. Gloria De Haven, the escape that left the bill behind. Tony Curtis used his rough hand to brush away the scraps of paper on the glass table and picked up the last photo in the cardboard box. The surface of the photo bore the image of starlet Gloria De Haven, radiant in an expensive dress. In the early 50s, Tony had only signed a small acting contract with a very meager fee. He lived in a cramped rented apartment and struggled to calculate every daily expense. Meanwhile, Gloria was already a familiar face in the Hollywood elite. Tony had assumed that betting her was the clearest proof of his absolute charm. However, as he ran his finger over the surface of the photo, he had to admit an incredibly ruthless truth. Gloria was never infatuated with him. She only used intimacy as a bait to directly drain his savings. The incident began on a late weekend afternoon. Gloria drove herself to Tony's shabby apartment complex. She knocked, walked straight into the cramped living room, and didn't bother with a greeting. She proactively removed her overcoat, moved close, and pulled him onto the bed. She performed physical interactions quickly, proactively controlling the pace and leaving absolutely no room for romantic whispers. That night, Tony was submerged in the supreme self-satisfaction of one who believed he had just conquered a powerful female star. As soon as her needs were met, Gloria immediately stood up from the bed and manually put her clothes back on. She reached for her handbag, announced she was hungry, and directly designated one of the most luxurious restaurants in the Beverly Hills area for dinner. Tony, wanting to maintain the glamorous image of a perfect lover after their intimacy, immediately nodded in agreement without rechecking the meager cash remaining in his wallet. As the two stepped through the glass doors of the restaurant, Gloria headed straight for a table next to the window. She offered no praise for his looks or any mention of the intimate interactions that had just taken place in the bedroom. She immediately waved the waiter over. She didn't bother looking at the prices printed on the menu. She boldly ordered a large lobster portion, a plate of expensive caviar, and requested the uncorking of a high-end wine produced decades earlier. Tony sat opposite her, clearly feeling his heart pounding in his chest and cold sweat beginning to soak his palms. He mentally calculated the total for the meal and realized it exceeded all the cash he was carrying. Throughout the meal, Gloria focused on enjoying the luxury dishes, leisurely sipping wine, and absolutely ignored the tense face of the man sitting opposite. Tony only dared to order a small salad, hiding his tightly intertwined hands beneath the table, when the last plate was cleared. The restaurant manager approached and placed a leather folder containing the bill in the center of the table. At this exact moment, Gloria immediately acted. She didn't look at the string of numbers printed on the paper, nor did she reach out to open her purse. She reached for her expensive handbag sitting on the empty chair, gently stood up, and informed Tony that she needed to use the restroom. She turned and strode toward the end of the red-carpeted hallway and vanished behind the wooden door. Tony sat alone at the table, trying to maintain a calm face while waiting. 20 minutes. Then half an hour passed, and Gloria still hadn't returned. Tony was forced to stand up and walk down the hallway toward the restroom area to look. When he arrived, he only saw the rear emergency exit of the building standing wide open. Gloria had called a taxi in advance, stepped directly out the back door, and left. She decisively abandoned the man she had just shared a bed with, leaving him with a massive bill. Tony Curtis used his strength to tear Gloria De Haven's photo in two and brushed them all onto the floor. The 6 women on this list were not lovesick or easily seduced by him. They faced psychological crises, family prohibitions, media trouble, or simple, pragmatic material needs. They proactively entered the bedroom, decisively turning his body and his reputation into a tool for solving problems. When the purpose was complete, They immediately packed their bags and cut off contact. Tony Curtis let his hands hang limp on the armrests of his wheelchair, closed his eyes, and accepted the clear truth about the past of a man who was always delusional about his own charm. Which woman's pragmatic actions on the list above surprised you the most? Type her name in the comments section right below. Click subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We will continue to uncover other brutal truths behind the closed doors of Hollywood's golden era.